Welcome to the Midnight Hour, where shadows stretch long and the unknown lingers just out of reach. Each week, we bring you tales to chill your spine and make you question what's just beyond the veil. Tonight's episode is titled The Long Road Home, written by Ella Noire. So, sit back, relax, but don't get too comfortable. In the Midnight Hour, anything can happen. Emily Hart was tired, exhausted, really. She hadn't planned to be on the road this late, but time had slipped away during her visit to her sister Maggie's. Now, driving down this foggy stretch of highway in the dead of night, she just wanted to get home. Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat, and she grabbed it quickly, smiling when she saw the message from her sister. "Maggie, text me when you get home. You know how I worry." Emily chuckled to herself. Maggie always worried. Her fingers typed a quick response.
"Don't worry, almost home."
The curve ahead looked sharp, the kind that always made her stomach turn. As she eased off the gas and rounded the bend, her heart lurched. Headlights, bright, blinding, and heading straight for her.
Whoa!
She gasped, jerking the wheel to the right. The tires squealed as her car fishtailed, the world outside spinning into a blur of trees, fog, and light. For a moment, everything was chaos. Then the car slammed to a halt, teetering on the edge of a ditch. Emily sat there, breathing hard, her fingers white-knuckled around the steering wheel. Her heart pounded in her ears. She turned her head slowly, expecting to see the other car, maybe wrecked, maybe speeding off. But there was nothing. Nothing at all. Emily took a shaky breath and reached for her phone. She typed out a message to Maggie.
"I almost got hit. Some idiot came out of nowhere."
She stopped mid-text, staring at her screen. The message wouldn't send. No service. Emily sighed, tossing the phone aside.
"Great."
Her hands were still trembling as she started the car again, pulling back onto the road. The fog swallowed her headlights almost immediately, but at least the car still ran.
"Just get home.
She thought to herself.
Get home and forget this ever happened."
She took a deep breath and glanced at the clock. Again, 11:45 p.m.
That can't be right. Great, probably messed something up.
It made no sense. She had been driving for at least another 10 minutes. The clock should have changed. She fiddled with the dashboard buttons, resetting the clock, but the glowing numbers remained stubbornly stuck at 11:45.
I give up. I just need to get home. I'll figure it out later.
She tried to calm herself, but the scenery wasn't helping. Every bend, every tree felt eerily familiar, like she had passed it a dozen times already. The sharp turns, the jagged branches reaching out from the woods, it all looked the same. She shook her head and flipped on the radio, desperate to break the suffocating silence inside the car. The static crackled for a moment before a voice cut through, the smooth cadence of a local news anchor filling the small space.
And in other news, we've received reports of a serious accident on Route 17.
She was on Route 17. As dangerous as it was not surprised at the report, especially with the weather. The voice continued.
The crash involved two vehicles. One, a freight truck that reportedly lost control and swerved into oncoming traffic, causing a head-on collision with the second vehicle, a sedan being driven by a single individual. Emergency crews are on the scene. As of right now, it is unclear as to if there were any survivors, but we are being told that there is, unfortunately, at least one fatality. We know already. Again, in other devastating.
The radio crackled again, and the signal began to fade. The anchor's voice warped, cutting in and out.
Prayers, families, updates, read.
And then, just like that, the station went dead. Static filled the car again. Emily's heart was racing, her breath shallow. She reached for the radio dial, turning it off with a click. The sudden silence felt even heavier than before. She let out a shaky breath, trying to brush off the chill that had settled in her bones.
Wonderful. Silence it is, I guess.
Her phone buzzed in the passenger seat, startling her. She snatched it up, grateful for a distraction, but the screen showed nothing. No messages, no notifications, just a blank, lifeless screen. She stared at it, her pulse quickening.
What? I just heard it. This is getting weird.
Up ahead, something moved at the edge of her vision. A figure. No, just a shadow. She blinked, squinting through the fog, but there was nothing there. Only the empty, twisting road and the ever-present moonlight casting strange shapes across the pavement.
Come on, get a grip. You're almost home. You have to be.
She said to herself, hoping she was right. After all, she had been driving for what seemed like entirely too long, and she had taken this route too many times to count, so she would know. The trees seemed to crowd closer to the road as she drove on. Emily's mind swam with confusion. Had she passed that stretch before? Was the road looping back on itself? The idea made her stomach churn, but every mile seemed to repeat itself. Same jagged branches, same glimmers of light in the distance, same cold, creeping dread. After a while, something flickered in the distance, red and blue lights flashing through the mist. A police cruiser, ambulance lights. Emily slowed her car as she approached, her breath catching in her throat. She could see several figures moving about, but something felt off. As she rolled closer, the scene became clearer. A wreck just off to the side of the road. Two cars, both mangled and twisted, barely recognizable under the flashing lights. The air was heavy, thick with an eerie stillness, as if the world was holding its breath. Emily's stomach lurched when she saw it, a body draped in a white sheet lying on the edge of the road. The sheet fluttered slightly in the wind, but underneath she could see dark red spots, blood soaking through. Her pulse quickened. The sight made her chest tighten, an overwhelming sense of dread settling over her. She slowed to a crawl, eyes glued to the wreckage. One of the cars, half crushed and barely recognizable, had its front end twisted into a tree. The other, something about the other car caught her eye. A tiny golden cross dangled from what was left of the rearview mirror. Then panic set in. As her mind raced, she looked at the same golden cross hanging in front of her.
This can't be happening.
No, it couldn't be. She had avoided the crash. She was still driving. She was still here. Her eyes darted back to the body under the sheet, and suddenly, the weight of the situation slammed into her. She stared, unable to tear her gaze away from the wreck. From the sheet, from the twisted, mangled mess of metal and glass. And then, it clicked. That wasn't just any wreck. That wasn't just anyone under the sheet. It was her. Her body remained frozen, eyes wide with horror, as she looked at her own wrecked car, the sheet covering what used to be her. She had never made it. The crash she had nearly missed had taken her. The fog around her thickened, the world growing darker, more distant. The flashing lights began to blur, fading into the mist. Everything slowed down. The road ahead of her, silent, empty, stretched on forever. Well, dear listeners, that was The Long Road Home, written by Ella Noire. No matter how far we think we've gone, fate has a funny way of putting us back on the path we're meant to take, even if it's a dead end. Thank you for tuning in tonight. If you enjoyed this tale, be sure to join us again next week for another story that just might keep you up at night. After all, sometimes the road we're on doesn't lead where we think, especially when it ends in the midnight hour.